I was a woman dying from a terminal illness. But to the man I loved, I was nothing. Even when I was alone in a hospital bed, begging for help, he was too busy fooling around with someone else. It had been a week. Jason Smith never replied to her message, never came home. Julia Lopez couldn't guess what he was thinking, so she gave up trying. But the nosebleeds were getting worse. Clumps of hair fell out by the handful. The pain in her bones left her clinging to alcohol for relief. In the bar, Julia Lopez's unfocused gaze drifted over the crowd on the dance floor, men and women bursting with life and energy. Things she used to have. Her vitality had long withered away. Whatever passion she had left, she gave it all to Jason Smith. Now, all that remained was a body on the verge of rotting. Julia Lopez curled her lips into a faint smile and downed her drink in one gulp. Just as she was about to order another, a familiar voice stopped her. Tony Camel stared coldly at her. In his eyes, Julia Lopez was never a good woman. She seemed to sense his judgment. Maybe it was the heat, maybe the buzz, or maybe the alcohol finally hit. She lost her usual calm and started talking. I know you don't like me. Honestly, I don't like this version of me either. But I'm angry. I'm bitter. I was with my husband for 9 years. And what do I get? He knocked up another woman, and I got a terminal illness. Call it karma. I didn't listen to the older generation, chased after some damn fairy tale love. So out of spite, I filed for divorce. Doctor, tell me, don't I deserve to die? Tony Camel pressed his lips together. He hadn't expected to hear any of this. Julia Lopez looked at him, eyes filled with sorrow. Doctor, I don't want to die. I'm too ashamed to face my dead parents. But I can't live either, because I'm broke. You get it? I'm not afraid of chemo, just can't afford it. She collapsed against the bar and broke down sobbing. The pride she'd built over the years shattered completely. Tony Camel looked at the woman in front of him, eyes dark. He let out a slow breath. There's always a way. As long as you tell me you want to live. Jason Smith parked downstairs. Thinking of the message Julia Lopez sent, his chest tightened with rage. Clearly, she didn't care. She really filed for divorce that easily? Just because he played a little too rough outside? Jason Smith rolled down the window and took a hard drag on his cigarette. It was just for fun. He never planned on leaving Julia Lopez. Headlights flickered in the distance. Jason Smith looked over and froze. In the passenger seat of that approaching car was Julia Lopez. Thank you for tonight, Dr. Tony. Julia Lopez said politely as she stepped out. No problem. Come to the hospital tomorrow. I'll get you something for the pain. Tony Camel offered a rare smile. Swallowing back the pity in his chest, he turned and drove off. Julia Lopez watched the taillights disappear. Just as she turned to go upstairs, a large hand grabbed her and slammed her against the wall. Jason Smith's eyes were bloodshot, his voice seething. You really hooked up with another man? Julia Lopez clutched her aching waist and muttered through gritted teeth. He's a doctor. I'm not as good at playing as you. Jason Smith flinched. He didn't expect Julia Lopez to snap back like that. Humiliated, he lost it. What got some guy to pretend to be a doctor? Came up with some terminal illness to cover up your affair? Tears streamed down Julia Lopez's face. How had they ended up like this? Jason Smith, I really have leukemia. Jason Smith yanked her inside and loosened his tie. You really thought this through, huh? I say one thing, and you make up a whole story about leukemia. Julia Lopez, your mind's quick. I'll give you that. Julia Lopez's breath caught. Her calm, black eyes stared straight at him. Suddenly, she had no strength left to argue. There wasn't even a flicker of surprise in his eyes when she said leukemia. All she saw was suspicion and mockery. Believe me, or don't. He really is a doctor, and someone like him wouldn't go for a married woman like me. Julia Lopez said flatly, masking the weight behind her words. So that's why you want a divorce? To be single again so you can sleep around? Jason Smith's glare was terrifying. Don't assume everyone's as filthy as you, Julia Lopez snapped. Pain stabbed through her bones again. and her brows knitted. I'm filthy, huh? Maybe I spoiled you too much. Now you think you can do whatever you want, even divorce me. Jason Smith shoved her aside. No, Julia Lopez cried, turning away. Jason Smith, don't make me hate you. He paused for a beat, then forced himself on her anyway. Julia Lopez went quiet, clutching the sheets with trembling fingers. She bit down on her arm, waves of pain rolling through her. She'd always known how rough he could be, but before tonight, this man had always been careful, gentle. And now, over a stupid misunderstanding, he showed his true face. At this point, she wasn't any different from those other women in his life. Jason Smith looked down at her from above. Still want a divorce? He growled. Julia Lopez didn't answer. He scowled and grabbed her chin to force her to look at him, only to freeze, blood draining from his face. Half of her face was covered in blood. Her arm was shredded from the bite. Yet, she refused to make a sound, too stubborn to cry out. You're insane, Jason Smith gasped, scrambling to grab his phone. I'm not going to the hospital, Julia Lopez forced out. Don't make a scene. I said I'm not going, she suddenly screamed. Jason Smith stood there, stunned, then turned and left the bedroom. Moments later, he returned with a first aid kit, quietly cleaning and dressing her wounds. Julia Lopez turned to look at him, forced a small smile. Happy now, Jason Smith. His face twitched, but he said nothing. Julia Lopez didn't care. I remember when we first got together, everyone joked that you treated me like I was made of glass. I was proud, you know. Thought I chose right. Jason Smith held her fingers, his heart twisting. Stop, Julia. You said you were scared of pain, so I told you not to have kids. But I didn't think, even if I didn't, there'd still be women lining up to have yours. Isn't that right? Julia, it was my fault. Please stop, Jason Smith whispered, pulling her into his arms. He had a terrible feeling he shouldn't let her say anymore. Julia Lopez's eyes were empty, as if he didn't even exist. I knew from the start, the first time you had another woman. I held on for 3 years, because I couldn't let go of our 9 years together. But how many 9 years does a person get? So I didn't care how many women you had. Didn't care who you gave your shares to either. She pushed him away. But Jason Smith, I'm tired. I don't love you anymore. His body jerked. The fullness in his chest collapsed into a void. Julia Lopez shut her eyes. That was the end of the conversation. Jason Smith, flustered, kissed her forehead lightly. Cut ties with that guy. Let's start over. Julia Lopez opened her eyes and looked at him, almost amused. Jason Smith, how can you doubt my love for you? Her gaze must have been too sharp-frowned. You know I hate seeing you with other men. I work myself to the bone out there for. What? So you can live in comfort, and you repay me by hanging out with shady people? That was it. Julia Lopez's heart went cold. After 9 years, all they had left was humiliation and fights. She sat up, found strength from somewhere, and shoved him out the door. Get out! I don't want to see you! Julia Lopez screamed. Jason Smith stared at the shut door, fist tightening and loosening again. In the end, he turned and left, like a petulant child. He had his limits too. As soon as she heard the car drive away, Julia Lopez rushed into the bathroom. Slumped by the toilet, she retched like she was trying to puke out her entire insides. 10 minutes later, she stared at the blood-streaked vomit. She let out a bitter laugh and covered her face. A whisper full of despair slipped through her fingers. Jason Smith, I'm not made of steel either. I don't have much time left. How am I supposed to face my parents like this? The doorbell woke her up. Julia Lopez blinked in a daze. The room was dim and quiet. She couldn't tell if this was a sorrowful dream or just lonely reality. She pushed through a wave of pain and dragged herself to the door. When she saw who was standing there, she froze. What do you want? She asked. You're Julia Lopez? Latina Mera looked surprised. She had seen Julia Lopez before, only briefly, from afar, but even without makeup, The woman had been stunning. Now, Julia Lopez's cheeks were sunken, her figure ghostly. She looked like a lifeless doll stuffed into oversized clothes. And yet this was the woman Jason Smith kept hidden and protected. Feeling bold, Latina Mera handed her something. She smiled. "Look, this is Jason's baby." Julia Lopez lowered her eyes slightly, numb to it all. Not just because of the child, but because Latina Mera called him Jason. "So this starting fresh you promised," Julia Lopez said softly, "was just comforting me before going home to your real family." She looked up at Latina Mera. "Is that what you came here for? To show me your bastard child?" The words sliced Latina Mera's pride to shreds. "What are you so smug about?" she snapped. "Do you even know how many times over the past 3 years President Jason said you were cold and boring? Said you clung to him like a leech back then. And now, look at you. You still think you deserve to keep him?" Latina Mera spat, her voice hysterical. Julia Lopez stared at her, almost amused. She was just about to speak when her eyes landed on Latina Mera's neck and her face went sheet white. She took a step forward and yanked at Latina Mera's clothes. Her eyes turned red instantly. She grabbed the necklace and choked out, "This? Where did this come from?" But Latina Mera had more strength than a sick woman like Julia Lopez. With ease, she snatched it back. "Jason gave it to me." "What? You broke and desperate enough to steal now. It's mine." Julia Lopez screamed, shoving Latina Mera against the wall. She didn't care anymore. She had to get that necklace back. How could she forget? Back when Jason Smith just started working. He spent an entire month's salary on a pair of matching necklaces as a gift for their anniversary. They weren't expensive, but Julia Lopez had treasured hers ever since. "Jason Smith, you gave our keepsake to her?" Julia Lopez was livid. Her eyes were bloodshot. Latina Mera wasn't backing down either. The two of them wrestled and shoved in the hallway. Ah! Latina Mera lost her footing and tumbled down the stairs. When she stopped, she clutched her belly and wailed, "My baby." Julia Lopez stared at the blood spreading between her legs, panic flooding her chest. She fumbled with her phone and dialed the hospital in a rush.